Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial Group, Ride and Investments, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights 7 to 9 Eastern on Jethro.fm.
We're happy you could join us on National Mac and Cheese Day. I was trying to think of a theme based around that. I'm thinking maybe what sides you would choose if you were going to like a barbecue restaurant, because mac and cheese is one of the sides. So we might ask our first guest, Zach Linfield. We got a good show going here. We've got some good guests. We've got MLB keeping us on track here. He was true to his name yesterday because he went to the game, and so he might have some input for us there. Mom's in studio hanging out, and Rex is working on the comms as usual. He's rappelling from the roof, I think. I can't see him right now. So, but yeah, we'll get started here with Zach. We're excited to have him on the show. He's a busy guy. We try to have him on when he's got a little bit of a break, so we're happy he can give us some time. And I guess he's headed into the All-Star break too. So did you make the All-Star team here, Zach?
No, they didn't choose me during my rookie year, unfortunately. I thought I put up decent enough numbers, but we'll get them next year.
You deserved it. Sometimes it's harder when you're a rookie. So they don't see the whole. I
anticipate that when we come back to Comerica Park, hopefully in 2035, when we get our second All-Star game at the park, that maybe I'll be chosen then.
Well, hopefully a few times before then too. But that's a good goal. It's always best to do it in your home ballpark. Anyways, that's fun. And there were so many Tigers that were chosen this year that I wouldn't have been surprised at all. We were Mike and I, my producer here, we were talking a little bit about the history of the public address announcers at Comerica and everything, and he was talking about how he knew Jay Allen and was talking about him a little bit, one of your predecessors. And then I saw that you were also with one of your predecessors here for a recent game and got to do a little bit of a throwback.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it was pretty cool because Bob Virgil's, that was like the voice that I grew up trying to emulate, just like I said on Twitter, X, whatever app you want to call it now. And it'll always be Twitter to me. But, Bob Virgil's was called in to do the starting lineups for both Seattle and the Tigers, all three games throughout the series. And I've met him before, but it was just kind of funny that, like, I kind of found out that he was going to be doing that through Facebook because him and I are Facebook friends. And I am never on that app. But when he posted that, I just messaged him and said, hey, like, I'm more than happy to go out of my seat for a few days. I can't wait for the opportunity to see you again. And the only message that I had ever sent him was back in 2020 when I had just kind of told him, like, hey, like, you're kind of an idol to me. Grew up going to games at Comerica Park, and you're a big reason why I got into announcing. And he sent me a text from that message. So it was just kind of fun to reminisce on the time that really not all that long ago when I was early on in my college career that I sent him that message, and he got back to me within like 20 minutes of me sending that message. And then to share a spot with him this past weekend was pretty darn cool.
Yeah, that's a cool story, too, because say what you will about social media, and it can get kind of bad at times, kind of toxic at times, but it is nice to be able to connect in that way. I've done the same thing for the show. I've found show guests and things like that through Facebook and different platforms, and it's a fun way to be able to find that common ground and that connection. So that's cool that you were able to do that with him and have that callback and have that history. It looked like he had a good time too.
Yeah, man, he was pumped up. I mean, as soon as he got done announcing the Tigers lineups, like, you could tell it meant something to him. And I mean, why wouldn't it? He spent all those years in the booth, and it's the same exact feeling I have every time I finish announcing the Tigers lineup. Like, you go through 1 through 9, and then you announce the starting pitcher, and there's all that anticipation of who the starting pitcher is, especially on Friday night when he got to announce Tarek's name as the pitcher on Friday night. And, he was psyched, as he should be, right? It's the coolest job in the world, at least in my eyes.
Well, exactly. And I mean, even if you're that's a good job, even if it's a team that's maybe struggling a little bit or whatever. But there's clearly a lot of juice in that building because this team is far from struggling, and you can tell there's a lot of energy in the building as a whole. Like even with the broadcasts, I haven't been to the park yet this year, but you can tell even on the broadcast there's a lot of juice and there's a lot of energy there, and that has to be fun to feed off of as the PA announcer.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I didn't really understand it at first, particularly last year when the Tigers kind of started that run, and it was right around this time a year ago where they started that magical run to the playoffs, and I didn't really understand like what I should do pacing wise to really ramp up a crowd until playoff time rolled around, because I had really just done it for small crowds at like University of Michigan events, and which are much bigger than the crowds that I would announce games for my high school at. But even then, you go and sit in Comerica Park's booth, and then you're in front of 45,000 people, and you're like, you know what, I can put a little more pause and a little more emphasis into what I'm saying, especially on a night where, like, Tarek Skubel's pitching. You really get into it, and then you hear the crowd cheer, and then you're like, they probably can't even really hear me at this point because the crowd is so darn loud. And then you just let it rip, and sometimes you're like, yeah, you know what, they're cheering for me, but obviously they're cheering for the player that's about to take the field. But at the same time, like, you're just an extra head in the crowd that just has a much bigger microphone.
Well, and you do provide a good service, and it is an important thing there. I do think that there is some interaction with that broadcast, with that announcement, and I think the crowd does get pumped up. Sometimes they're just in their own heads and they're screaming, depending on where they're at. But I'm curious about what some of those kind of tricks that you use, because we've had several play-by-play folks on the show here, and we talk shop sometimes and some of the nuances, because it's a very intriguing thing to me, because although I think sometimes you guys go too unnamed, you're too anonymous in your roles, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to facilitate the game, but that's a major function that everybody is interacting with, whether it's a play-by-play guy that's on the radio or on TV, or whether it's a public address announcer like you. There's a lot of different roles that are important, and I don't like when those go nameless and faceless. That's why we have a lot of those folks on the show, including beat writers and things, where you don't necessarily look at that top byline there and see who's doing it. So I'm curious what you've kind of picked up with those big crowds, with that energy, and what you kind of do. You said some of the emphasis and stuff, but letting things sit a little bit and then emphasizing other things.
Yeah, the funniest thing about it is the easy part is when the crowds are ramped up, because you don't really have to expel all of your energy when the crowds are ramped up. Like, yeah, it's fun to say, let's just say it will be fun to say Tarek Skubel's name eventually when he starts a World Series game for us, right? It's like the crowd won't need me to yell into the microphone that he's going to be the starting pitcher for the day. The real, like, nuanced part of it that's really like a niche part of being an announcer, particularly behind a public address mic, is when the team's getting beat. So like Friday and Saturday night, when let's be real, they didn't play well this past weekend. It's very hard that when the crowd is still there, especially on Friday night when there was a post-game concert, there were a lot of faces that don't typically come to a ballpark on a Friday night, because usually you're there for the fireworks in the baseball. But this past Friday night, a lot of people were there because it was a baseball game and a country concert. So how do you still be energetic yet not treat it like you're announcing the starting lineup for the Pistons during the NBA Finals? So like you have to dial it back, but you also have to make sure, like, you still are the announcer for the Tigers. You don't really take anything off or put anything on to when the Mariners are coming up to bat, but you're allowed to dial it back, and you're there just to be conversational at that point when you're down. Unfortunately, it was 9 runs at the time, but you're still a hometown announcer. You just don't go full blast. You don't give it your 100%. But like I said, man, the big crowds are fun, and they're really easy. as long as you've got your full voice behind you. But it's when they're down big that's kind of the difficult part.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction, and it's interesting that you mentioned the Pistons announcer, because I feel like if you think of that role, that public address announcer role, that I feel like John Mason would be one of the ones that you think about in the Detroit market, because he's been there for so long and he has this particular style. But from what I've seen, I've been to a lot of live games. I haven't always heard his introductions, but what I've seen, he doesn't really have like a notch down. He's always on 11. He doesn't really have like a low one. He's always doing the longer, more forceful stuff, and that's his style, and everybody's gotten used to it. But I wonder how he would kind of handle that question, because he seems to be high energy all the time, but you got to play to what your style is.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the funny thing too is when I go to games, like, I like to be there early. My dad and I, when we would go to Tiger games, or we would go to Michigan football games in particular, excuse me, and we always go and we'd watch warm-ups, and we'd just go for all the theatrics before the games, and we get to see the entire show. Like, it's like you're watching an entire movie while you're there at the park or at the stadium or the arena. And a lot of people that go to Pistons games, they don't necessarily show up an hour before game time. So I've actually taken a lot of what Mason does and apply that to being conversational throughout the game. So this past weekend, our wonderful host, Kara Wolfbauer, she was not there. She was at a wedding. So I had double duty. I had to wear two different hats. I had to be the PA man, and I also had to be the host from inside the PA booth. So they don't necessarily want Mr. Announcer guy to do the hosting stuff. So I had to be very conversational. And the perfect example is when Mason does the NBA Code of Conduct read like 30 minutes before the game starts. It was a little closer to tip off in the playoffs just because they knew how rowdy that crowd was going to be at LCA. But he is one of the best at being conversational throughout his pregame reads. And I mean, really only someone with an ear of an announcer or something of the like would really pick up on that. But he is elite at doing that.
Oh, yeah. I had to imagine, as I was asking that question, that there's got to be some nuance even within his amped up approach, because you got to be able to, like you said, switch hats and go into those different roles, because as you know, and as you're trying to do here and make your way through this whole journey, you want to eventually be a play-by-play guy, and so you want to wear those different hats so that you get the different experience and you don't get put in a box. There's nothing wrong with doing that full time if that's what you wanted to do, but obviously you have career aspirations, so you want to show that there's some versatility there.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the variance in your voice and the energy that you put forth into it, because, I mean, let's think about it. If you were the PA guy and you were the play-by-play guy, like you were able to do it for different sports or the same team, let's just say. If the Tigers are down 9 runs, my PA voice is going to be very dialed back. We're going to be as conversational as possible. That way the people at the park are still having a good time, and they don't have to be ambushed with me throwing my 100% at them while the team is down. They're like, okay, Mr. Announcer, like, we get it. But it's the same with the play-by-play guy. If our team is down 9 runs, the Tigers are down 9 runs, or hopefully Sunday I'll get to do Michigan football or the Lions. And if they're down, let's hope they're not, 35, 40 points, like, I'm going to be a lot more conversational, and I'm not going to be as 3rd down and 2 big play Dan Miller because he's so darn good at what he does. You're going to be a lot more laid back, conversational. You're just talking to the faceless people that are actually listening to you on the radio. And at this point, you're just kind of having a conversation like your buddies. So there's a lot of nuance to it that, I mean, just a lot of people don't understand. And then you kind of grow into it. Like, I wouldn't have understood it when I was little, and now I understand it a lot more. Like, hey, we don't necessarily want to hear you give us the best growl you possibly can in your voice if we're down by 12 runs in the 9th and a position player's pitching.
Well, and you've had the luxury of being able to watch two great ones at that with Benetti and Dickerson, and I want to talk about them a little bit and that nuance that you're talking about, because I think that's an interesting conversation to go into. But we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with Zach Linfield. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're coming back here with Zach Linfield. We were having an interesting conversation with him here because I am one of the people that likes listening to the actual broadcast, and I'm interested in a lot of the nuances that you're talking about. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, especially with, I tend to watch the TV broadcast, so I see more of Benetti. I obviously see Dickerson when he's in there covering for Benetti on Saturdays typically, but I do see that difference. It's interesting to watch Benetti specifically navigate the different scenarios. So when he's with Dirks, he's a little bit different. When he's with Petrie, he's a little bit different. When they're up, he's a little bit different. When they're down, he's a little bit different. And I'm now very sensitive, I think, to the differences that he has, because then sometimes I'll be like, is he in a little bit of a mood today, or is this just something? This is a bit that he's playing up a little bit, and it is interesting to watch. So it has to be interesting to see the things behind the scenes. I know you had experience with that last year, and now you're obviously part of the team and working with these folks every day.
Yeah, the funny thing too with Benetti is that, I mean, we all know that he is so elite at his job, and I think a lot of people, particularly on social media, which you said earlier, which is 100% accurate, can maybe be a little too aggressive on social media, and sometimes it just can be a not very pleasant place. And I mean, he only gets trash sometimes because it can be treated like a podcast, like a talk show, which I think it 100% should be. And I think that's why it's so entertaining. And I think at this point, if, like you said, Ryan, you watch all the games, you'd agree that, like, we're learning. Like, I know the game. I mean, at least I'd say better than most people. And yet I feel like every time that I watch, when the Tigers are on the road, I'm learning something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about baseball. And it's not just Benetti. Like, it's Petrie, it's Dirks, Carlos Pena when he was doing Tigers games on FanDuel, when the Tigers were in Kansas City, I'm pretty sure it was. We learned so much from all three of those guys, plus Benetti, plus Dan Dickerson. Throw it back to Jim Price, who, like, when I announce the third batter in the Tigers lineup every time, like, I give him the batting third. It's just, you learn so many things from all of these guys, and I think that can kind of slide under the radar versus were his big calls good or were his big calls bad. And I think one thing we can all agree on right now is that Dan Dickerson and Jason Benetti are, I mean, bar none, they're the best duo of TV and radio in the entire league. And I like to listen and I like to watch a lot of baseball because it's on all the time now. And I have not heard a more elite duo in all of baseball. Like, we are so darn blessed in the city of Detroit with all of the broadcasters that we've always had. But I mean, back to the main point here is that Benetti himself is so fantastic at these nuances. When the Tigers are down, like, he feels the pain. Like, he said it yesterday in the ball game that the Tigers might not be able to win at the same clip that they did in the first half if they don't bolster the bullpen. Like, he even sounded kind of tired of the bullpen, and these are our guys, the Tigers. As a fan myself, I'm going to throw out the we or the our because that's just how we talk as sports fans. Like, the bullpen could probably use some help. We love the guys that we have, but could it always get better? Yes. I'm not going to go into Scott Harris's office and say, like, hey, you need to go trade for these guys because I love the guys that we have. But I mean, like, you could tell in the broadcast yesterday, because I had the day off from the game, that he wasn't very impressed with the way that those guys are pitching. Like, Tommy Canley's gone out there twice and hasn't picked up an out, and he's allowed 6 runs. That's not Tommy Canley. So, you know, like, it's a rut, and all teams go through a rut. You play 162 games for a reason, and that's why baseball is such a beautiful game. So he is there. He ebbs and flows with the broadcast and with the game, and I think his highs and lows are just as good as anybody.
Oh, I totally agree, and I'm sure we're going to sound like homers saying that those two are the best pair, but I'd be willing to say, okay, give us a better pair of TV and radio broadcasters, because I thought it was a real big get Benetti, especially after the previous situation. And especially,
it was shocking when it came across my timeline. I was like, what?
Yeah, exactly. I was very surprised that he would even be available. I think some of that maybe is the whole doing the weekly game on Saturday. And that's what I've heard from people in the business anyways. But I mean, shoot, you put up with that, especially if you're putting Dan Dickerson on TV and then Greg Gagne in the radio booth. That's not a bad situation. Greg's a friend of the show. We talked to him on the show. He's a great announcer as well. And so you guys have a good team, including yourself overall. So you got a lot of folks that can do a lot of different things. And that is clearly a place of emphasis. And I remember Benetti bringing this up on a broadcast one time. I think that's one thing that he's noticed that he was a little surprised with, that how passionate the Tigers fans are and how passionate they are about the broadcasting element, maybe more so than other markets, because he's in a lot of markets. Yeah, exactly. So and you must see that too from your position.
Yeah, I mean, they care about the in-game experience. Like, just from a public address standpoint, where I am a part of just an incredible freaking team up in the booth. The control room is about as lead as it can probably get. I've been to a lot of different ballparks, and I mean, pretty much all of the ones that I've been to have done a really good job, but just from what I can see and everything that they put into it, from my director to president of fan experience, like, there's a lot of thought that goes through this, and a lot of people will never even come close to realizing like how much work probably is flooded into putting together a show for the people. It's not just a ball game. Like, this is supposed to be an experience for everybody. And like, I'm still learning day by day, particularly on the play-by-play side of things, and public address has come along just because I've done that a little bit longer than everything else. But like, back to Benetti, he's able to turn the on and off switch like in the blink of an eye, the snap of a finger, because he does the game Friday night. Well, he not this past Friday night because we were on Apple, but then he goes to Houston. He calls a walk-off for the Astros, and then he comes back and does the game at 1:10 on a Sunday. Like that, how can you not admire the effort, the energy, the tireless work that guy puts in just to go sit there in Detroit and leave his hometown team and his city to come and represent the Tigers? So like that's why I admire him so much, and I aim to be a person like him, not just a broadcaster, but a person with a tireless work ethic that represents the city of Detroit in the best way possible.
Oh, I totally agree. And this has become like a tribute to Jason Benetti somehow. but it is worth saying, because I think he is a little underrated, and all those things that you're talking about. He's clearly a good teammate, because that's one of the things I wanted to mention to you, because obviously I know you through the show. I know Greg Gagne through my show, and I hear those names along with a lot of the behind the scenes names on the broadcast a ton. Like on the main broadcast, I hear your name a good amount, and he's doing that very intentionally, just like when he refers to Double-A Erie as the fighting Greg Gagne's or whatever. He's doing that intentionally to make sure to be a teammate to the other folks in the system here.
Yeah, it's like a roll credits, right? It's like the end of a movie when when you just see everyone that was like involved, and he does such a good job. And I mean, I could never hear if I'm actually verbally included in the broadcast, which, like, if I am, hey, that's pretty cool. But at the end of the day, if I get games off, or the Tigers are simply just on the road, and he mentions their director, producer, like cameraman, it is the Jason Benetti tribute that we're throwing out there right now. But I mean, give flowers and flowers are deserved, right? So, well, yeah, it's perfect. I think the way that he does things and represents other people as well, and not just himself, he is the last person to be me. And how can you not appreciate that?
And it's a compliment to the team as a whole, because like I said, it's about all of you guys, and it's all a unit. There's the folks behind the scenes, like you're talking about, that don't get seen and are talking into his headset, and he highlights that. But yeah, you're an important piece of the process. You've talked about a lot of the other pieces, but the Detroit clearly has an emphasis on hiring for this side of things. They want to make sure they get quality folks in those roles, and I do think that you guys collectively improve the in-game and on TV, on radio experience. So no, it was a fun conversation. I'm glad we bounced around and talked about all of those things. I didn't get a chance to ask you, so when I give you a chance to plug here, I want to make sure, did you actually do USFL this season? Because that looked like an exciting season, but did you get a chance to do that much? And then tell the people where they can follow you here.
Yeah, I got the chance to do the majority of home games and the first game, which was on the road before the Tigers kicked off their season. The schedule, it didn't work out. It didn't hold hands as perfectly as I thought it could be. The Tigers had an early onslaught of home games, so I didn't get to travel with the team, but we're planning on wrapping it up next year. Obviously, the Panthers had a pretty darn good year, ended up losing the championship game via the way of blowout, but that's why you play again next year. So definitely looking forward to that. Again, appreciate you having me on, Ryan, but people can find me at Zach Linfield on all socials, and it's ZACH. My parents decided to make me unique.
yeah. The HK has to be a little confusing because.
Yeah, well, my roommate is Zach with the K, so you can imagine how mail goes around our new spot.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to you coming back on when time permits here.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Hopefully, we'll be talking playoffs then.
That would be great. Yeah, I'm excited for what you're going to see here as the season goes on here. But we should have some fun baseball down the stretch here in the second half ish. So we're looking forward to it. And we'll make sure to check you out at the ballpark, and we appreciate you coming on.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Zach. Take care. Thanks to Zach Linfield. Appreciate him coming on. Always an interesting conversation with him. He's clearly going places here. We're going to actually switch Zachs here. We're going to go with Zach Trathen and Carlo Mario of Hockeytown Rundown. We're going to talk a little bit more Red Wings after our Red Wings review, which was a tough one for me to say all of last week. I pulled it off once, but I'm not going to say it a lot today. But we're going to have those guys on after the break and talk some puck and get their assessment of the offseason here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Welcome back to the Mary Free Bed Sports Intel Radio Show with Ryan Walsh, presented by Collectible Insurance Services. We're happy to bring these guys back on. They were great the last time they were on, and we vowed to do a little bit of an off-season review. Now, we probably will do that as the off-season kind of goes on, but we're going to kick into football coverage, so I wanted to make sure to get them on before we do that. So, and they've had some interesting episodes about kind of building out what the roster may look like. So I want to talk to them about that. So want to welcome Zach and Carlo of the Hockeytown Rundown podcast.
What's going on, gentlemen?
Yo.
Hey.
Great to be back.
Great to have you. We're excited to have you. And I don't know if you heard any of we did kind of a larger hockey episode last week, and we wanted to get you guys on to kind of continue that, give you your own kind of platform and spot here, because you did an interesting podcast recently about kind of building out the roster now with the moves that have happened. And I know kind of one of the buzzwords that we were talking about on your last appearance, which is the Detroit buzzword. If there's one Detroit sports buzzword, it's definitely grit. And I feel like the Red Wings are the last team kind of looking for that. I like that they're looking for that. So I kind of want to get your guys' feel, like you did on the episode, of how you're kind of building out that roster and who you're seeing kind of in these spots and where we potentially need to fill in some folks here.
Yeah, Carlo, you start.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, the grit part still comes from within for the most part. There's a lot of young guys on this team that I think we all fall victim of taking them for granted. But I like, you look at Casper, Raymond, Edvinson, Sider, these guys are all under 25 years old. Their prime window hasn't even opened yet. So I think grit's going to come from those guys. But there's one dude that I want to call out who's a new face to the team, and that's Mason Appleton. I think that guy brings a lot of grit to this team. His style of play, not sexy at all. But I feel like if you boys remember the name Luke Glendening, he was a fan favorite because of the work ethic he had. I think we're going to see a little bit of that with Mason Appleton when it comes to grit. And then, of course, I think it's going to also come from within with these young guys that we have that we all fall. Like I said, we all take these guys for granted because they're so young. They're so young. And that's the great news for this team is they're young and they're still going. They're still developing. And their prime window, again, hasn't even opened yet. So I do think there's a lot to look forward to. And I do think that I really think this team might surprise us, guys.
I like that.
Just to follow suit with what Carlo said, too, he would have been fifth on this team with 76 hits this season, too. So that's great right there. And just to put out another name, Jacob Bernard Docker, too. When he played for the Senators back in 2023, he put up 156 block shots. Inserting him on that third pair, too, that's going to help us out considerably. I mean, that would have been second on the team if he would have translated that to this season, if he had a role with his two-team stint that he had.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do think that because obviously we know you guys went through kind of the fantasy GM phase. We talked about that on your last appearance, and obviously the fans always want to go for the big names, the big moves, and there's a lot more prudence that needs to be executed as a GM of any of these sports, and so they're obviously trying to do that, and they're trying to budget for those future guys that you're talking about, Carlo, and saving money to be able to re-sign guys and acquire guys and all of those things. But I did like what I saw from the signings because I could see, like, yeah, there's nothing flashy about those lower end signings, but they're filling out those lines and maybe upgrading that position for everybody. Want to mention one thing because shout out to East Grand Rapids High School for Luke Glendening. He was a couple years behind me in high school. I went to high school with Luke, and I knew him. I
love that guy, man.
I knew him as a football player. I have to admit, guys, he was a great football player.
That's what they say.
Okay.
We heard about that.
Hell of an athlete, man. Hell of an athlete.
When he went into his hockey career, because I didn't know him well or anything, but when he went into his hockey career, I didn't even realize he played hockey. I knew him as the football star. He was the star of the football
That's
team.
Hilarious.
And then I saw him, and then I saw his name, and I saw him on the Red Wings. I was like, wait a minute, that Luke, he plays hockey. So I was behind on it. That's why I have to have you guys on the show to help me out with this stuff here.
Anytime.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's good that you're taking us through this stuff. You clearly know it well, and so I like what you're talking about with slotting those guys in before we kind of get to slotting them in and kind of seeing how this looks and projecting it out. Do you see many more moves to be made here to fill out any of those open slots, or do you think we're about done with the acquisition phase of the offseason?
To be honest, there's really no more open spots. There is a 23-man roster set, whether if we want to admit it or not, and that includes players like Carter Mazur, Austin Watson, and Justin Hall being on the bench as your three players in that spot right now. So my take was on our last episode when we recorded yesterday is that if a trade does happen, it's going to be very similar to what we did with Oli Mata last season. It would be a during the season trade, or if training camp there's a young guy that comes knocking that has to force a trade, then that's the route it's going to be. That or injury. If a huge injury happens at training camp, that's the only reason why I see another move would be made. Because to your point, like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cap space still that we have going into next season. So not sure if Steve wants to start utilizing it now. And if he would have done it already.
Well, and it seems like this is a theme of this offseason because obviously, like you guys said, I'm with you. I think there's reason to be hopeful with what we've seen here with just the natural improvement in the young core, because you always have to look at kind of the aggregate team age and think, okay, if these guys are closer to the end of their career, there's a likelihood that they might be more likely to get injured or go downhill. Or if they're young, hey, maybe they'll take the next step up. It's not always linear, but it's a good predictor of how that may look. And obviously there's a lot of key young guys on this team that you could see making a leap, and that's a good thing. But I've heard good things about the free agent class for next year, so I have to imagine that they've got an eye on that. And there's the fact that even though they should hopefully take a step up, I don't think any of us are expecting any sort of cup run this season, so they're building for that build to that in maybe a few years, ideally.
Correct.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's so many different, like the next two UFAs are going to be pretty wild. And I think I said it, I don't know if it was 2 weeks ago, not this last episode yesterday, but the one before. My take on this team is I think they're going to take a massive leap going into the 26-27 season. I think truly that they're going to go from being that flirting with wild card team to cementing themselves as a lock team within the top three of the division based off of some crazy development, of course, because we do have some kids that, again, like, they're good, man. Like, look at their age and look what they're doing in the NHL. They're good. They just got to grow up a little bit more, which is a great problem to have. But I find it very interesting that, Zach just said we have a 23-man roster. We still have like $12 million. So, I mean, it's almost, you ask about, is there another move to be made? It's so hard to predict that because on one hand, you're like, well, we can go into the season as is. And on the other hand, we got $12 million and we still don't really have a top left wing. So, I don't know what Steve's waiting for. Only he does. I mean, I wish we were all, a couple of flies that are buzzing around in July right now on his wall. But, it's so hard to predict, man. But I think regardless, it's almost like he's learned from his past free agencies, and he's really playing the conservative route, which I am 100% okay with, because when the time comes, he can strike. He's got the money. He's got a spot available. And, I go into next UFA. My hope and dream here is Kyle Connor. Hey, buddy, we're waiting for you, man. And we got the money to do it, and we have the spot available for him to slot right in. So, and that's the type of leap I'm talking about, folks. It's, you had a guy like that, you're a different looking team. You got a lock top six, and away we go.
Well, and if you have a young core, because this holds true, I mentioned that for the Detroit market as a whole, this is the last team to kind of be following this same, not that they weren't always, but now they seem to be fully entrenched in kind of a very similar team building mode, which is young core and then layer folks in once it's a more attractive destination. And arguably of the four sports, the Hockeytown is the most attractive destination because it's the biggest dynasty of any of the Detroit sports programs. No offense to any of the professional teams, but they still have been down in recent years. So if you can kind of take that next step up, to your point, then maybe you can take that swing, and then that big free agent is a little bit more convinced because you see, oh, okay, yeah, they did take a pretty big leap last year, and so that young core with me added, and with the moves that they've made, and with these young guys coming up, maybe we're building something here.
Yeah, to your point.
Exactly.
Yeah, to your point, I can't remember the last time a big name free agent of any sport, it doesn't matter, basketball, football, hockey, that decided, oh yeah, I look at the Detroit Red Wings or some mid team that can barely make it into the playoffs, and they haven't. Why would I go to that? Have we seen that recently? None that I can remember. So to your point correctly, once we start getting towards that part of actually making the playoffs and tiptoeing our toes into the water, so to say, that's when we'll start being more of a desired team for the bigger name free agents that want to come and play for the Detroit Red Wings, a historic team, a historic franchise.
Well, and
100%.
And the idea is that there's another factor there, which is the potential signing cost, because if you are a better team, you might be able to sell somebody on a slightly lesser contract because it's a better situation. The worse the situation, the more money you have to shell out. Usually those things go hand in hand, but it's not always the case. But yeah, I'm glad we could have that discussion. I want to kind of build out those lines like you guys did on the podcast and talk about that a little bit here after the break. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. And it's getting me pumped up to talk with Zach and Carlo here of the Hockeytown Rundown podcast because yeah, I feel like the timber and the tenor of what you're saying is a little bit more positive after the off season that you guys have seen so far. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, I would say that for sure. You know, we dished out a bunch of super low risk contracts for guys that, you know, are coming in. We haven't even talked about JVR yet. I mean, JVR comes in at $3 million cheaper than Tarasenko. He put up more points than Tarasenko last season. You know, these deals, you look around and you look at these deals, they're all low risk. There's literally no term. It's just, it can only go up, man. Like I really like the conservative approach Steve took, and I like the flexibility that he left himself just in case something happens where he can pounce on it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I do like that because I get it. It's tempting to try to make that big move, but I've been talking about this a lot and probably will later in the show about, I feel like it's ever present right now on the basketball side of things because the Rockets made that big move and they acquired Kevin Durant, and that's gotten them a lot of press and a lot of people are putting them at the top of the Western Conference now. And the Pistons are at a similar spot, or were at a similar spot to where the Rockets were generally, and I'm glad they've been more conservative, just like the Red Wings have. I think that pays off in the long run. I think it's a more sustainable, you don't get that immediate bump, but I don't think those moves are always sustainable. Sometimes they are home runs, but that is a home run swing. It's not a swing where you're just trying to put it in play and improve and move the lineup along. You're going for that home run swing, and if you miss, it can be kind of deadly and set the franchise back. And I feel like that's kind of what the Red Wings specifically have been dealing with to a degree, is they're trying to deal with some of these contract situations that have happened in the cupboard getting cleared out. They've had to concurrently add back to that cupboard and try to put a playable team out there on the ice.
Yeah, no, 100%. And looking at it from the perspective of making moves like that, the Red Wings, you got to think, you know, in basketball, they give out different term lengths of contracts, right? I believe it's like 4 is the max that you can give to an NBA player. In hockey, it's still 8 with a team that you've been with, or if you go into free agency, the most where you can get is 7. And just using maybe like a Mitch Marner as an example, who comes in at 28, almost 29 years old, I believe he was. You give him that 7-year deal. Yeah, I think you're going to get that little extra bump, like you mentioned. You're not going to be an instant Stanley Cup playoff team just based on that one player. That's why they call it a 23-man roster, and there's 6 players out on the ice, and they're shifting every minute or so, right? And so Mitch Marner wouldn't have helped us, not just one player, not even a couple of players. This team needs to wait a little bit longer, and even if you did sign a Mitch Marner to a 7-year deal, that contract on the back end, you're going to have him in his later years, and you don't even know what this team's going to look like. So you got to stay the course a little bit and be more conservative, like Steve Yzerman has, and just wait for these young guys to be more utilized than what we've seen so far.
Well, I think that's
really well said.
Go ahead, Carlo.
Well, I was just going to say, like, how brutal would it have been if we did, you know, if Mitch Marner did pick up the phone when Stevie Y called, and Mitch Marner does come to Hockeytown, and we're bounced out of the playoffs in the first round. Maybe we do enough to get in, but we're bounced out in the first round. I feel like that probably would hypothetically get even worse media attention and worse press. It's like, oh, you guys got Marner and you got bounced. You know, I think Zach nailed it. I just think that timing, now's not the time for a Mitch Marner to be on this team, or any 28, 29-year-old to be on this team until our team catches up. And what I mean by that is back to my original point when we opened up, when these young guys, these 22, 23, 24-year-olds, when they crank open their prime window, that's when you're going to see some big-time names, getting some attention with Detroit, because maybe we're not falling off in March, right? I think you were saying earlier, it's like, hey, wow, this team actually has taken some steps. I want to go there and help propel them into the playoffs and go for a run. Well, that's going to happen when this team, A, finds their identity, takes that step, and wins hockey games in March, and they're in that conversation of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because when you do have an older guy, whether you sign him or whatever, trade for him, and you put him in the slot where a young guy could occupy that slot, maybe that older player is better for that brief amount of time, that first year. But if you're giving that younger guy more time to cook, then giving him that experience, you're going to make sure to give him a platform, and then you've got him arguably probably cheaper because he's a homegrown talent. You maybe re-signed him. You got to see him when they were younger, rather than overpaying on the open market, which seems to be how this, you guys would know better than me for sure, it seems to be how this free agency period has gone. It seems like a lot of overpays to me.
Yeah, one of them was Tanner Jeannot, who got a 5-year deal. I can't remember exactly what the cost amount was, but that for an older player that lengthy, like that's a little too much for the Red Wings to handle right now. It would essentially be like JT Compher 2.0 or Andrew Cox 2.0 or Ben Sherrod 2.0. But yeah, Carlo, what are your thoughts on that?
No, you nailed it. I got nothing to add on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, because we live in an era where everybody's very impatient because of how we're programmed right now. But I think patience pays off in sports. But to that effect with the young guys, I'm curious. Obviously, you guys mentioned kind of some of the young guys that are on the main roster that are due to take a leap, that are already becoming bigger names like Raymond and Casper. But who's that next level? Who are the guys that maybe haven't been brought up yet, or saw a little bit of time on the main roster and are maybe ready to take that leap where they could be kind of the next group in line, young guys to watch out for, maybe even some of whom are here in Grand Rapids where we are?
I'll just name just to name a couple: Nate Danielson, Carter Mazer, and then Axel Sandin Palika. But Carlo, who do you think?
I think Carter Mazer, man. I'm a huge Carter Mazer fan. We've been hearing that he's over 200 pounds now, so he had a massive offseason, which is exactly what he needed, and for his own confidence and just his own sake of saying, I can do this. But I'm really looking forward to Carter Mazer, and I do think we see him suit up for the Detroit Red Wings this coming season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that you can make that case for all three of those players that I named as well. They would be the next ones up. Nate Danielson being a center, and then Axel Sandin Palika being that right-handed D shot, who should man the second pair in the years coming. Hot take, though, just real quick, Jacob Bernard-Docker will play mostly on the second pair this upcoming season. I do firmly believe that.
Wow. Heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's what we want. We want intel here. So that's I do feel like that could be a sneaky good signing, as some of the other ones were that you guys were highlighting. I do like that, because the low end, there's not really much of a floor on those. If those guys don't work out, they didn't allocate a lot of money, they didn't allocate a lot of years, they didn't sacrifice anything in the future, it's worth a stab. There's really only upside with those types of deals. But it's interesting. I've heard Mazer's name a lot, so that's become a common name as far as that people seem to be big on him after the offseason that he's had. The interesting part to me with that is sometimes, even though these injuries can be a setback, that also then sometimes causes these guys to rethink a little bit and go back to the drawing board. Usually it's adding on some muscle and improving their body. If it's an upper body injury, then they're improving their base, and vice versa. And it's interesting to see that, because sometimes it can have a future benefit, especially if it's early on.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with Jonathan Berggren. He had injuries at the very start, right after he was drafted by the Detroit Red Wings. And same thing with Carter Mazer. He's gone through the injury cupboard, so to say, right? So with him, it's him adding the size that he needed being able to handle the maturity of the league that the NHL brings, the heavy hit, and the way that the game is thought and processed, it's definitely going to help them out in the long run. So it's great to see they've actually added some size because, like Carlo has said multiple times on our show, he is he's gonna get mollywopped out there if he shows up 170 something pounds. It's not easy playing.
Anybody will. Anybody will. Can you imagine going up against the Florida Panthers at 170, 175 pounds? Good luck, buddy.
Well, it's a good point bringing up the Panthers because I feel like that was a major point of discussion during the draft because I'm going to copycat the phrase that everybody says, which is the copycat league. They say that about all leagues, which there are these ebbs and flows of the trends, but obviously their large roster, I think that's going to lead to some of these other rosters being large. So you're going to have to contend with that. I think you want to kind of cut through the middle where you're able to play against those folks, but not necessarily try to play the exact same style because you got to play your own style, whatever that is.
He's kind of done that already. He's already kind of done that via the draft. I mean, you look at Maurice Sider and Simon Edmondson on the back end. They're both really big players. Michael Rasmussen's another big player. Elmer Soderblom. Then you got some of the smaller guys that come with speed and some tenacity with them, like Lucas Raymond, newly drafted Carter Bear, who's a great playmaker and goal scorer overall. So he's kind of already been doing that, drafting ever since 2019. To start. So I would agree with you that every team is trying to mold after them, and they did mention that a lot of teams are now trying to look at that because that was their third time going to the Stanley Cup Final. So teams are starting to finally take notice. But glad to see that Steve Yzerman was ahead of the curve because he knew from his time in Tampa. So he's trying to translate that now.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting trend, and I think it'll kind of ebb and flow where there'll be kind of a peak with that, and then teams will find other competitive advantages, but that's the fun thing about sports. But appreciate the discussion. Great stuff. Great intel. We'll look forward to having you guys back on to update things here as we go, but tell the folks where they can follow you and hear more great coverage like this.
Carlo, you're up. Tell the folks.
Hey, let's go. So yeah, you can find us all pretty much all over the place on social media, folks. You can find us on X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're all over the place there. Direct @ for myself on X is Drumlion. And we love engaging with people, man. I think that's one thing that's great about the Red Wings community real quick. They're very educated people, very educated hockey fans, and obviously they have a deep passion for the team. And there's nothing more that we love to do than give these people a voice, similar to what you guys are doing with us right now, and just have some solid conversation to talk shop about the boys in Motown. So that's where you can find us all, and that's what we're trying to do. Zach, I'll flip it to you.
Yep, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, along with all the socials that Carlo mentioned. You can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you prefer to call it. You can find me at Zach Trathen on there. And then as well as all the other social medias, just like how Carlo mentioned it, we just want to engage with other like-minded folks that enjoy Red Wings hockey and sports in general. It's fun, and we tell people all the time, if you see us in person, come up to us. We'll grab a beer. We'll grab something to eat. We'll hang out. We'll talk shop, much like how we're doing here. And we appreciate you guys having us on once again and doing them.
Definitely. We like having you guys on. We'll definitely have you on again. And I think you hit on a good point that the engagement is the key. That's what's nice about the social media platforms and stuff, being able to engage with the fans. And I think giving them an opportunity to do that is a nice feature. And that's what a lot of these sports are about. But yeah, we appreciate you guys being on, and we'll check back in with you when appropriate. We'll look forward to having you back on.
Yes, sir.
Amazing. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
All right, thanks to Zach and Carlo. We appreciate them coming on. Be sure to check out all the Hockeytown Rundown stuff. We're going to bring on probably our most frequent guest, one of our more frequent guests, Robert Bondy from the Spartans Wire, and he's going to give us an update of what he has found interesting on primarily the football side of things, but the Spartans as a whole, and maybe a little basketball too, and talk about the athletic director situation as well. So stick with us. You're listening to check in with this next guest here. He may be our most frequent guest, as I said before the break, one of our favorites here on the show, Robert Bondy from Spartans Wire. It's a good time to check in on the Spartans because I think we're we usually seem to be on the same page here, Robert. And I was reading some of your stuff as I normally do, but in anticipation of talking with you. And I think we're both similarly upbeat about this football squad this year.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's great being back on the show, Ryan. Always enjoy talking ball. And I'm kind of, I don't know if I do this every year because, everyone's got their own biases, but it seems like I am a little bit more upbeat and kind of expecting some bigger things out of them this year. Certainly, I think there's a high ceiling. There's also maybe a little floor, but I am starting to feel a little bit optimistic about what they can achieve and kind of what they bring back and have added in the portal and, what they could probably do this year.
Well, and for those folks that would say, well, you write for Spartans Wire, of course you're going to be upbeat. I will remind those folks that when you were on early in the season, last season, you were the one that was calling the Indiana stuff that was happening. You were the one that said on the show that you thought they have a chance to go 8-0, which they did, and then that they may go to the college football playoff long before you were hearing that anywhere in the national media. So that was not because you had some stock in Indiana. Maybe you were trying to pump me up since I'm an Indiana guy, but I was a little bit more reserved about that take, and you were a little bit more out there. But now the shoes are kind of on the different feet, and I'm still an Indiana guy. I'm still an Indiana grad, but I think there's reason to be hopeful. And you had a recent article about how the Spartans have a chance to be the Indiana of this year, and looking at their schedule and looking at how things break, if Childs makes that leap that I think he can and becomes more accurate because he's got all the other tools. I think it's mainly the accuracy that he's got to have. He's got some more weapons there. There's been some switching around. I think they reinforced the offensive line, which was a key. But they, like you said, they've added a lot of pieces, and they added certainly more than they lost, in my opinion. And they've got a more favorable schedule. Part of that schedule was pretty brutal last year.
Yeah, well, I think last year, the schedule, it's in the Big Ten, right? I don't think there's truly an easy schedule, right? I mean, I know some people pointed to Indiana last year, maybe having an easier schedule and that leading to their success, but a lot of what Michigan State has this year and Indiana last year, and me kind of connecting the dots between the two, is a lot of toss-up games, right? And it's kind of those things of, last year for Michigan State, they went into this season, with Oregon and Ohio State and Michigan and, teams that, which granted they played Michigan pretty tight, but those were games at the beginning of the year, you kind of chalk those up as L's, right? And then it got even more difficult when you saw what Indiana did. They became a top 10 team. Illinois was great last year too. So there was, going into the year, you kind of knew it was going to be an uphill battle. This year, while the schedule isn't as daunting at the top, you really only have maybe that Penn State game as that kind of clear-cut, probably mark it as an L in Penn and feel pretty confident about. But other than that, it's a lot of toss-up games. Now, granted, going to USC, going to Indiana, going to Nebraska, those aren't easy games, right? But they are potential toss-ups because, again, it could be, that Michigan State's a little better. Those teams aren't maybe as good as the preseason expectations, and you win a couple of those. And if you can find a way to win those toss-up games, you quickly kind of find your spot in the same spot as Indiana last year. And for Spartan fans, they'll remember really 2021, when Michigan State had Kenneth Walker III. That was kind of the same idea, right, where you had a lot of toss-up games. You won most of those toss-up games. You upset Michigan. You had some other decent wins early in the year, and you would find yourself in the playoff that year if it was the expanded playoff. So I think, it's hard to say, Michigan State will be the Indiana this year, or Michigan State will be in the college football playoff, but I don't consider maybe as far-fetched as, other people would say. Now, again, maybe I'm wearing the Spartan goggles when I say that, but you look at the schedule, and a lot of those games are going to be in that kind of, maybe a 7-point favorite or 7-point underdog range, and when you're in that area, you get a little injury luck, you get a little bounce, you see that growth from, Aiden Childs, and all of a sudden you could see yourself looking at a pretty special season.
Well, yeah, and you basically lay out the blueprint in that article, and that's what kind of broke it down for me, because this is a quote from Robert's article, and Spartans Wire, be sure to check it out. But basically, you're saying, okay, you win the non-conference games, which should be somewhat doable. Western Michigan, no offense to any alums that are in the studio right now or that host the other show on this radio station here, but at Boston College, and and Youngstown State, those all seem like they could be pretty winnable games depending on how things go. You got them losing to Penn State, which is going to be the odds-on thing for that game. And Penn State had to reload a little bit this year, so I'm still interested to see. I could see them taking a little bit of a step back. I'm not saying upset alert or anything for that game, but we'll have to see if they have as solid of a season next year as they did this past year. But then you're just winning 7 of the last 8 games, which, like you said, there's no easy games there. But USC, Nebraska, UCLA, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Maryland. I don't think it's totally out of question to be able to have that run if some of these things come to fruition here that we're talking about, that these guys take some leaps and all of that, because they had a pretty decent roster last year, but it was clearly something to build on. They had some young guys. Those guys have gotten a full season under their belts, and now, most importantly, arguably, Jonathan Smith has had a full season in the program. Now they've got a new athletic director that should add some juice. So I feel like between all of those things, all of those factors, that might help get things kickstarted here.
Yeah, no, I mean, you unveiled and rolled it out perfectly, and again, that's glass half full, very optimistic way to look at it, but it's possible. And I think even looking at this last year, I know it's when they went 5-7, it was their third straight year missing out on a bowl game, and really there was that tough finish to the year. You flip a couple games, that Boston College game, I recently watched it, and you watch the game, and they really should have won that one. You win that game, you go to a bowl game, you feel a lot better about where the program's at after year one. The Michigan game too, that was a very close one that Spartans will probably say they should have won, and it felt like they probably could have won that game, and that would have again made a huge difference. So if you're 7-5 instead of 5-7 right now after the first year of Jonathan Smith, you feel a little bit more optimistic about what this team could be achieving. You feel more, you probably get a little bit more national buzz, and maybe, it's not as far-fetched to throw out the idea of going to the college football playoff. So, that alone last year shows the, how quickly you could swing one way or the other. So again, for me, really, I think we're going to know a lot about this team by week 2, because if they don't handle business against Boston College, who was a good team, right? It's not a bad team. It's not an easy game. But if they don't get that win week 2 against Boston College, we could be looking at, closer to the floor situation of, another year without a bowl game. If they win that game, you build some momentum. You go out west potentially for that first tough road game at USC, 3-0, and you see where we go from there. So they have all the, again, if everything breaks their way, they could be really good. If it breaks the other way, they could be finding themselves again sitting at home in the postseason. And if they don't get to a bowl game this year, you start to, wonder what we're doing, because it's that have been 4 straight years. I think I remember this past year, Michigan State is the only team that hasn't gone to a bowl game from the Big Ten in the last 3 years. So it's kind of a shocking stat to think about, but it's kind of where they're at right now. They got to get over the hump this year and get to a bowl game at least.
Well, and I think that's a pretty plausible floor for them. I think you brought up the key game. I watched that Boston College game. I watched most of the Michigan State games last year, and that really was a key game. That was probably one of their worst games, kind of against expectation, because they were so close. There was a few things that could have broken their way, but there were some mistakes that weren't very timely, and yeah, you do that game differently. That game has a different result. It might play out for the rest of the season. So to your point, with Boston College being early again, if they can get some momentum, then all of a sudden, because that happened with Indiana when everybody was downplaying them and saying, oh well, they played easy teams to start the season. Yeah, sure, they weren't very highly ranked teams, but their margin of victory was better than Alabama's at that point, who was playing a similar schedule. So that seemed to be a good sign. It's not so much the competition, but you got to factor all that in. And then by the end of the season, people went, oh, okay, I guess this team's are for real. Although some people still didn't adopt that and then said they shouldn't have been in the playoff. But then we saw how that worked out with the aforementioned Alabama squad. But
right, exactly.
but yeah, I think there's a real chance that they can get some momentum in that non-conference schedule, and then roll into the regular season, so to speak, the conference schedule Whereas last year that was there was a bunch of games all bunched up there that it was like, man, I don't, they're going to be fortunate to win 3 out of 5, 3 out of 6. That's not the same schedule in my opinion. Just looking at the schedule, you never know how this is gonna go. But that for this year, it looks a little different.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this year, there is a stretch there in the middle, I believe, where they play, I want to say, UCLA at home, then at Indiana, and then I think Michigan. And then after that, they have a road trip to Minnesota and Penn State. And that, middle 5 is going to be tough. But again, those aren't, it's not like necessarily last year where they played, I believe, after the Boston College game, they played Ohio State at home. Yeah, it's at home, but it's Ohio State, and then at Oregon the following week. So the 3-0 start quickly became 3-3 just because, that Boston College loss is so critical, right? And they were able to rebound. I think they, after that, beat Iowa to get back above 500 and made that Michigan game interesting. But it's less of a true gauntlet of, you can mark down some L's at the start of the year. It's going to be a lot of 50-50 toss-up games. And obviously that's speaking now here in July. We'll see, by September how the team's looking. And those 50-50 games may not look 50-50 either way, right, depending on how the teams are playing out, injuries, and a lot of considerations. But if you look at the positive side, I think they could be pretty darn good. If you look at the negative side of things, they also could, come up short on those toss-up games, and you find yourself sitting at home in the bowl season again.
Yeah, and I want to talk, we're going to take a quick break here, but I want to talk about the potential players to watch out for. We've hit on some of the names, but maybe some of the transfers and some of the additions, or some of the guys that you expect to take a leap in order to execute this level of improvement. But stick with us. We'll come back with Robert. We're introducing it this week, Robert. This is kind of more my style, so we're trying this out. But that was Blood of a Lion, but that's more Lions themed. But we're talking some Spartans here, and yeah, I'm curious who you think. So we obviously talked about Childs. He plays the most important position. He's going to be a key. I think he's prone to make a leap this year. You saw a lot of good things from him last year, but the accuracy kind of suffered. I know in some of our conversations last year, we talked about how the bigger thing was having the accuracy in addition to all the other tools. I think to a degree he almost has too many tools. So it's like he's got to decide what to do. Whereas a pocket passer just can sit there and go, hey, I got to make the most accurate throw. I'm not worried about running. I'm not going anywhere. If I'm Jared Goff, I'm not going anywhere. But if I'm Aiden Childs, I can do a lot of different things. So it's being able to have that throw, have those progressions be the first, second, and third option, and then create after that if he needs to.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, Childs will be the one who ultimately drives a lot of the success they have this year, good or bad. But the one thing I will say this year compared to last year is he does now seem like he has all the recipes, all the ingredients per se to be great. And I say that because, you had Nick Marsh come on last year, the star freshman receiver, and he'll probably be their top receiver this year. And I consider him probably a fringe all Big Ten, maybe All-American. I don't know. All-American is probably a little too soon for the sophomore, but he's got all the tools to eventually play in the NFL. But I really like what they also added in the portal between Amari Kelly from Middle Tennessee State and then Christian McCray from Kent State. And I think they each bring different things to the table to go with what Marsh already had. So I think last year's receiving core wasn't necessarily bad, but I think it's better this year. So that's going to help Childs in the second year starting. The tight ends is really good too. I mean, Velling's back. He was a big transfer from Oregon State that they got last year. And, he had a so-so year last year, but he still was, decent, right? And I think it shows the expectations he came in with, and maybe not necessarily living up to those expectations, but still very solid. And you look at, the preseason rankings, Michigan State is considered to have one of the best tight end rooms in the Big Ten, up there with Oregon and Ohio State. So, and that's a lot to Velling being the lead guy, but they have some other depth there too. So Childs is going to be working with quite a bit on the offensive side in that skill position area. Running back is we'll see how it shakes out. They brought in the guy from Sacramento State, who, could, I think, on paper, probably your leader to be the starting running back at that spot. But, they have a couple in-house guys, too, and Frazier and Tullis as well. So that'll be interesting. And I think we already kind of touched on this, but the O-line is going to be a big question mark. I'm I'm optimistic that they're going to be better. They did add some guys with the portal. Connor Moore from Montana State was the FCS All-American edition that got a lot of attention. I know Auburn and Cincinnati and Ohio State were also in on him in the winter portal window. So he's going to be in there. But the thing I always like to be hesitant with offensive line is they're probably going to have 2, maybe 3 starters that come from the portal. Offensive lineman in the portal, it's the old saying is if you have a really good offensive lineman, you're not letting him ever go in the portal. Now, the guys they took are from, I think, Wake Forest, Oregon State, Montana State. So those are guys who obviously did really well where they were and they wanted to move up, right? Because, I know Wake Forest is ACC school, but moving up to the Big Ten is a different story, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that offensive line comes together because you can have all the skilled positions and have all that talent there, but if you can't block, it doesn't make a difference, whether it's in the passing game or the running game. So that'll be an area to watch. Like I said, I'm hesitantly optimistic about that group because it has been kind of an area that they've kind of struggled in, the last few years, and hopeful that having that group improved will, make a big difference on the offense in general.
Well, I like that they added to it and tried to tweak it. Hopefully improved kind of the weak links in that chain, because we both know, watching a lot of football and covering football, that it's the offensive line is more of a chain. It's kind of as strong as its weakest link, and not to single anybody out, and I'm not going to with this particular line, but that's normally how it is. So the more reinforced you can find that. I think the running back duo was decent last year, but it was harder to see what they could have done with a peak offensive line. But like you said, they improved that receiver room, and I think the Velling note is a good one, because I feel like he kind of got washed out a little bit. I think he is probably, of everybody, will be the most direct beneficiary of Aiden Childs improving his ability to go through the reads and his accuracy. I think Velling would stand to benefit the most. And so if that's the case, I think we're going to see his true potential, because between that and the fact that I think he got washed out a little bit in the strength of that position in the Big Ten. That was an amazing crop of tight ends in the Big Ten. You watch a lot of Big Ten overall. So I'm sure you saw what I saw. We had 2 that went in the first round from the Big Ten in the NFL draft. That didn't happen very often from one conference. You had 2 tight ends, Loveland and Warren, from Michigan and Penn State. Not to drop an Indiana item in there, but I think Horton was a fairly solid tight end at Indiana. Now he's on the practice the mini camp team here for the Lions. There was a lot of good guys in there, so I think his name kind of got washed out as Childs was struggling to find him, but that could be a great safety valve headed into next season here.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think Velling is going to be a guy we see perform more, and I think the big thing too with him is he was a red zone threat with Oregon State before coming over to Michigan State, and I think last year Michigan State's red zone struggles, impacted his output. And a lot of that comes down to, if you don't have receivers that are going to get open or make a difference, then it takes away from your tight end, right? And we saw with Nick Marsh, he had his spurts, but he was a true freshman. And I think this year, with other more comparable, better receivers around him, they can't, the defense can't always double team him. They're going to have to take the other guys a little bit more seriously. That also opens up Velling and the other tight ends. So I do really like the skilled positions and what they have around Childs, including Childs too, for that matter. I think Childs is going to take a jump. You saw it in the second half of the year. He really cut down on the interceptions. I think he's got this persona and this reputation that he didn't take care of the ball. And yes, he did lead the Big Ten in interceptions, but if you looked at, I believe, the 11 he threw, 8 were in the first 6 games, only 3 in the last 6. So there was improvement, there was growth. You give him more weapons, you can truly see the potential there with him. So it'll be interesting. The defense side of the ball, we'll see about too. I like what they've done in certain areas. I think the linebackers in the secondary are also going to be pretty stout. That defensive line is the big question mark. They couldn't get much of a pass rush at all last year. They didn't do a ton to address it in the portal. They've added some guys, but that'll be a big question mark because you can have a good offense, but if your defense can't get stops, it is a wash.
Yeah, and the one thing, I guess, because we're both being pretty hopeful, and I think there's reason to be, but as somebody that, as you are, follows the Lions a lot, it watches a lot of Lions games.
Mm-hmm.
One of their main tenets of their growth here, in addition to the grit that we mentioned earlier in the episode and everything, is building inside out, building the trenches out. And it seems like if we're running through the units as you ran through them, the one you were most worried about on the offensive side was the offensive line, and the one you were most worried about on the defensive side is the defensive line. So hopefully, so maybe we've identified something that if that comes together, then they might be able to kind of hit that ceiling rather than be close to that floor that we were talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it, and that's where I think, if the defensive line, they have talent there too. I mean, we're starting to see some of the guys that Mel Tucker recruited in some of those really good classes, hit that peak point in their career, junior, senior status. So they have the talent in-house. They have it there. It's a matter of if it hits, whether it's on the offensive line or the defensive line. We're talking about potential former four-star recruits that are going to be starting on both sides of the ball. If they hit that potential on both the offensive and defensive line, then yeah, we're looking at something more close to the ceiling. I think because they've elevated the rest of the roster around it and they have more depth, which is a big thing on both those sides of the ball too, I think we're going to see a very unlikely of hitting the floor. And then we're going to probably see them somewhere. If I was a betting man, I'd probably say, 6, 7, 5, right around that win total. But again, I'd be more likely to say they're going to be closer to the ceiling than the floor. Here in, mid-July now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We'll definitely be checking back in with you because I think it'll be fun to cover this team this season. I think they'll be an interesting team at the very least and provide some interesting content and observations here. So we appreciate you joining the show as always and tell people where they can follow your coverage here.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm always writing Spartans Wire. I think it's Spartans Wire USA Today affiliate. So always check out our preseason coverage there. We'll be coming out with our own preseason Big Ten media poll here in the coming days as we get close to Big Ten media days. And you can also follow me at Robert Bondy 5 on X as well.
Definitely give them a follow. It's good stuff. I always check out the Spartans Wire stuff. And we didn't even talk any basketball today. We'll do that at a future episode here because I think the basketball team's going to be interesting this season too. But we'll talk some football first and move on to that. But we appreciate you joining the show here, and we'll look forward to having you back on soon.
Definitely awesome. No, I appreciate it, Ryan. Always enjoy coming on, and always available to talk Michigan State football or basketball as we get into closer to the winter.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll have you back on here, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Robert. All right, thanks to Robert Bondy. Appreciate him coming on. We're going to finish up with some basketball here. Bryce Simon, who we've been trying to get on for a couple weeks here, he's been busy and he's been actually out at Summer League, and I haven't had a chance to watch the Pistons in Summer League here. So I want to get his thoughts on the offseason so far and what he's seeing in Vegas there, which is probably not very cool because Mom and I were there a month or so ago, and it was warm then. So we'll talk to Bryce here after the break. Got a lot of off-season stuff to talk about. And I think he is either just coming back from Summer League or is still there. Are you back from Vegas yet here, Bryce?
Yes, I'm definitely back from Vegas, man. We probably spent too many days out there. Like, I don't even, quote unquote, do Vegas. Like, I don't even do Vegas things. And I still, am just ready to get out of that city after, honestly, a day or so. We were out there. We flew in on a Wednesday evening, and then we came home yesterday, Sunday. We flew out, not first thing in the morning, but in the morning. So I was definitely ready to be home, see our kids, get back to the normal lifestyle out here. But I was out there for Summer League for a few days.
Yeah, I don't blame you for wanting to come back. My mom and I went out there in June and did some fun stuff. Also, not the regular kind of Vegas stuff, but went to some concerts, stuff like that.
Yep.
But because that stuff is all great. But one of the things on my sports bucket list is actually the Summer League, which I know that's not necessarily similar to maybe going to the NBA Finals, which I have been to, or some of the other things, the Super Bowl, etc. But the summer league seems like a very interesting environment, and I like the environments that are a little bit more relaxed, where you're milling around, talking with people, getting to interact with the people out there. I've found that the Basketball Hall of Fame celebration is like that. I have several pictures of my mom who's not very tall, and she's laughing at that in studio here, with some very tall basketball players, because we were able to interact with Charles Barkley and Dikembe Mutombo and Julius Erving, because they're pretty relaxed there. Summer league seems like a similar environment.
It really is. In terms of what you're talking about there, it was funny. The Denver Nuggets were actually on our flight. We fly out of Denver, and we're waiting for our, in the different situations you're around them. She's like, man, they make you look so small, which, isn't normal, because in my normal life at 6'6", 220 pounds, I'm much larger than most people. And so it is a little different whenever you're at the arena. That's the only place I feel like I'm just, I'm kind of like everybody else, same height, all of that. But that is what is cool about Summer League. I tell people all the time, I don't end up watching the games as much as what I would like. I'm definitely a worse scout and analyst, that is awful, analyst, when I watch games in person, because I'm always talking to this person or that person, or, you catch up with a fan or whatever. It has gotten kind of crazy, to be honest with you, out there. There's so many people, but you do still get those interactions when you're walking around the concourse or whatever. You're always running into people, which I truly do love about it.
Oh yeah, that's a fun part of it, and I know you maybe didn't necessarily get to break it down like you normally do yet, but we still trust your scouting very much on this show. So I'm curious about what you saw. I haven't had a chance to watch the games yet. I will, but I wasn't able to do it before the show. I looked at some of your coverage of it and the box scores and everything, but I like that. I watch all of the Summer League games. I watch a lot of the G League games, etc. And it seems like an interesting squad this year, but I'm curious what some of your takeaways were.
Yeah, so, if people want to check it out, shameless plug, the Motor City Hoops Substack, I put raw notes. It's not like paragraph form. It's literally just I type out notes as I watch the game. Great drive by Ron Holland. Ron Holland's really passing the ball well. It's a little more detailed than that, I would like to think, but that's what it is. So if that's your cup of tea, you can go to the Motor City Hoops Substack. It's completely free. Check it out. I have notes on the first two games. And I think that's really where we need to start is Ron Holland, who has looked really, really good in these two games, quite frankly. I was there for game one. I was driving home for game two, so I actually watched it today on film, and Holland was awesome in that game one. I think his passing has been really good. His process, his assist. So I'm looking here at the stats. He actually has a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. That does not do justice how his passing has been in these two games. He had 3 in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the first game where teammates either just dropped the pass or missed the shot. I think his passing has been really good. He's pressured the rim. But I think the most important development, 55% from the three-point line, and it looks really good. The jump shot looks really refined. It looks better. I think he's looked every bit of the part that you would want Ron Holland to look in his second season of Summer League.
Yeah, that's good, because he, I think, is one of obviously we're going to talk about and have been talking about, kind of some of the key core pieces that are the core to the future of the Pistons, which primarily are Cunningham, Ivy, Duran, Thompson. But I think Holland is one of those swing pieces that if he hits and if he can develop, because we've seen a lot of good things to his game here so far. He got further up in the rotation than I thought he was going to get last year. He kind of supplanted Fontecchio in the playoffs to a degree. I think his hustle and his defense and his energy got him there, which those are more choices than than skills. I mean, they are skills too, but it's more of an effort related thing. And so it's, can you develop some of those other skills? We know he has athleticism, but the shooting, like you mentioned, and some of that playmaking, because man, there were some games where he showed some big time flashes last year. I like that he had to be the feature guy on this team and got that experience, because yeah, if he can be that and be some of that juice for that second unit, which should be pretty solid this year, that could be a huge boost to this team as they're trying to work in some of those new pieces and work on the rotations and see who is in those rotations.
Yeah, I think at times he can be a forgotten player in terms of, J.I. and J.D. were very much talked about going into this offseason. J.D. because of his improvement throughout the season, J.I. because of the injury, and what did it mean, and what would they have been with him, what were they without him, and most importantly with those two guys, because they had contract extensions, right? Like their rookie extensions are available this offseason. And then, of course, people are in love with Asar, and rightfully so. And it's like, okay, now he gets a whole offseason where he's not dealing with blood clots and, something that's bigger than basketball, making sure he's like just truly okay as a human being. And he who knows what his offseason was like. And so there's all these guys to be excited about. Obviously, Cade Cunningham coming off an all-NBA performance. I think at times Ron can be forgotten. Like, this was a number 5 pick too. Yes, it was a down draft, but this guy has real two-way upside. And I am fascinated to see, because I do think coming back in year 2, I'm not saying he's going to come out and show all of it, but if we see real growth, like what if he shoots 35% from 3 this year and there's real growth? Like, that's really exciting in terms of his potential. Or is, like you said, the focal point of the second unit as a second-year player, where it's like, hey, this looks pretty good. Maybe a couple more years of growth, and he can do this even a little bit in a starting unit. So it was exciting to see. It is Summer League. I tweeted out before Summer League, like, hey, we all agree not to overreact, right? We're not going to overreact to Summer League. But I was just texting with somebody and said, I find myself getting excited about the possibilities of what Ron Holland could be for this team, not just next season, but moving forward overall.
Well, and I totally agree with you. That's a good disclaimer. But I also like, that's one of the things we focus on this show is kind of the team building aspect and looking at what the building blocks are. So we talk a lot about the minor leagues or the developmental leagues of the respective sports, and that's why we talk to a lot of pundits from those areas, because it's nice to kind of see the future in that sense. No, Ron Holland isn't going to be consistently putting up performances like he did in Summer League when he gets to the NBA rotation, because there's a supply and demand issue there. There's the idea that there's going to be other people that are taking up that volume and those shots and all of that. But if he's put in position to do that, if there's injuries, if that certain lineup on the floor has him more as a feature player, those are good things to watch out for. And like you said, he's very young. I think because we are so used to kind of instant gratification in our current cultural makeup, that we have these rookies that can't even legally buy a beer, and we go, well, why aren't they ready yet? Well, because they can't buy a beer and they haven't been in the NBA for very long.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, it'd be fun to go through the Pistons roster and see how many of those guys. Yeah, like Ron's out in Vegas. Like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, all he's playing is basketball, I'm sure. So, yeah, there's real development available for these guys. And the other thing I'll point out is, I feel like this last year was the first year of like real structure for this organization over the last few, right? I mean, listen, I love Dwayne Casey. Obviously, he's still part of the organization, and I think he got a bad rap at time. But it probably, it seemed like it was probably time for a change. And then we don't have to revisit the Monty Williams 1-year era, but it wasn't good. And so some of these guys, like Ron, probably got the best situation possible. He came in with the new staff, the new organization, and like if nothing else, one thing Trathen has done better than Troy Weaver is surround these guys with real vets, real floor spacing, real opportunities to flourish and grow their games in a way that Troy Weaver just didn't. I mean, at some point we're going to have to look back at Troy Weaver's tenure once we see how these guys grow and think that maybe he was a decent draft evaluator, right? Like, we can't be excited about all these guys and then not give him some credit for that. And we'll see down the road. But one thing Trathen has done and we saw it this offseason, is, okay, well, we're going to lose a historic three-point shooting season from Malik Beasley. I better make a conscious effort to go try and replace that to the best of my ability. And I bring all of that up because it's so important for the development of players, for the evaluation of these young guys, for them to be in roles that they need to be in early in their career and can be successful in early in their career.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great point. And I've been viewed, I think, as a little bit more of a Weaver apologist than maybe other folks. But that's part of the reason why, because several of the players on this team are ones that he acquired. Yes, we can go to the misses and we can talk about the Killian Hayes thing and talk about some of the other things. But I think he did have a decent plan at times where he was trying to build the young core and then layer in veterans. And he did layer in some decent veterans, in my opinion. The timing just wasn't right. And so now that timing is now becoming a little bit more poignant. And so I want to talk about that. We'll take a quick break here, but I want to talk about the kind of what that build out looks like and what you think of kind of the changes, because yes, we did lose Beasley and he tried to reinforce that, but I want to kind of are we liking this group better so far than what they lost? And then obviously talk about that other factor, which is that you were referring to, which is the improvement of the young core here. But stick with us. We'll come back with on the Bryce show. Simon. He's given us great stuff. Bryce, I was trying to do this with the transaction so far, and the off season's not over, and there's a lot of things to be decided, but with a team that has a young core and had a great year last year, and then seeing what happened with those finals teams, seeing two teams that were more kind of core oriented and not let's acquire all of these stars and play NBA 2K25 or whatever and get all of the stars on the team. We're going to build the core and have more of a team aspect, have a lot of two-way players on both of those teams. I want to kind of get your assessment of what you thought of the offseason. Obviously had the unfortunate break of the Malik Beasley thing, and you talked about how that was a historic three-point shooting season. But one thing I try to look at when somebody exceeds expectations by so much, some of these other guys, it's like if you had gotten, where would you have put Duncan Robinson versus Malik Beasley at the beginning of last season? Where would we have looked? The situation on the Heat was not as favorable for Duncan, and when it was more favorable, he had some better shooting seasons. I have to imagine putting him by Cade and having all those screens that Duren and Stewart are going to set for him, that's going to improve his splits, I think.
Yeah, first and foremost, I do want to say I think this young core has earned the right to stay together and find out more about them, at least until the trade deadline. I say that because I want the listeners to understand where I come from when I'm evaluating this offseason from Trajan Langdon. I was going to this offseason with essentially the kind of run it back mentality. Now, I said, you don't have to run it back with the exact same players. You can make little tweaks here. You can replace this guy with that guy, whatever. But I wasn't really in for a huge move unless, there was a few very specific names that I was like, okay, well, if you can get that guy and it's not a king's ransom, okay, I would understand making it then. But in general, I was, give me 50 more games. I want to see what J.I. looks like. I want to see if JD can continue to improve and grow and be consistent with what we saw down the stretch last year. I want to see a star with all of the things we've already talked about. So that's where I'm coming from with the offseason. I mean, I have a hard time being upset about it because they didn't choose not to bring back Malik Beasley, right? By all accounts, they were going to bring him back. It sounded like there was an offer on the table that I assume he probably would have taken. And then at the last second, that gets just taken off the board. This is not a possibility anymore. And they pivot. And here's how I look at it with Duncan Robinson, Malik Beasley. You said it perfectly. Are you telling me that what we know about Duncan Robinson as a floor spacer, as a shooter, as a movement guy, he can't replicate? I don't know if Beasley was going to be able to replicate what he did anyway. It was truly historic three-point shooting season. And I just find it hard to believe that Duncan Robinson isn't going to be able to provide the same type of floor spacing and shot making that Beasley did. Is he going to make 300 threes? I think I'd be crazy to predict that. But I think you brought in a pretty high volume, not in his history, a good shooter, percentage-wise, volume-wise, all of that. I'm okay with it. And at the end of the day, it's not like Beasley was a big-time defender. Obviously, Duncan isn't either. I think under the circumstances, and here's the other thing, that contract is essentially a one-year deal. Like, it's only $2 million guaranteed in year 2 and non-guaranteed in year 3. So if he doesn't have the season you want or somehow has a huge regression, you get out from under it and you move on.
And that's a key for the way they're doing it, which I personally love. They're not attaching, they're not leveraging their future on any of this stuff. Like you said, they're building that core, and I'm very much of that mindset, because I think this is a good enough core with some development to be one of the leading teams in the Eastern Conference. We have to see how these guys improve, but it's I think you kind of hit on it with the Duncan Robinson thing. You put Duncan Robinson with Cade finding him in the right spots with those screen setters, because I'm a big one. I like watching the big guys set screens, and Duren and Stewart both set great off-ball screens, and I think that's going to free up Robinson big time for some of those guards to find him. You mentioned the Ivy thing. I feel like these are a couple things that I say on the show often, but this group didn't really ostensibly play together all healthy last year, because Thompson was still reconditioning and Ivy got hurt. And so there was not the healthy core was not together at all. And they still had a pretty darn good season. And so you play that with what you have now. And yeah, I think it's easy to say, hey, just the young guys improving, them all playing together at the same time, and then maybe even just holding court with those veteran pieces. Is one person going to replace Beasley? No, maybe not. But they added LeVert. I think Lanier could factor into a degree, although he's a rookie. We talked about the improvement of some of the other guys, but it'll be interesting to watch them, to your point, and see what they have, and then make the decisions from there. Because the other thing that I've said pretty frequently since it happened, Houston and Detroit were in similar positions to me. I know Houston was a little bit higher up as far as the record and the standing in the conference, but they had a young core. They were on the rise. They were putting a lot of pieces together. They got the right coach, all of those things. I don't like the Durant move at all. I will eat that later in the year if it ends up working out. I'm fine with that. I know I am counter to what a lot of people are saying, but I am glad they're sticking to the young core and waiting to make that swing, because I don't think that's going to go well in Houston, even though I recognize the kind of player that Durant is, and I know they have a great young core. I just think between the injury history and the age and the questionable team fit that Durant has been in other situations, I just don't see it working out for one of those various reasons. So I'm glad Detroit has kind of held their cards here.
Well, here's what I ask a lot of people. Do you feel like Detroit was playing well down the stretch, the end of the season and into the playoffs? You feel like they were playing good quality basketball?
Of course. Yep.
So here's what they essentially did if you feel like they were playing good quality basketball down the stretch. In terms of their rotation, they essentially traded out Beasley, Schroeder, and Tim Hardaway Jr. for Jaden Ivey, Karis LeVert, and Duncan Robinson. Now, Fontecchio also is out, and I do think that that's important to talk about, because I do think that is a potential hole on the roster. There's two kind of positions that I think you could point to and be like, man, I wish they had a little more depth here. But in general, that's kind of what they did. And I realize J.I. is like the card that plays stronger than everybody else in that scenario, but he wasn't there last year. So whenever people try to tell me they're taking a step back or they're frustrated with the offense, like, I think they're going to be better to start the year, because that is who they were at the end of the season. And that was a team that ended up in the playoffs and gave the Knicks a run for their money. And that is truly who you traded out, along with a year of growth from Ron Holland, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, another year in the system. Heck, another year for Cade Cunningham. Like, you're telling me he may not have another growth in terms of his three-point shooting, limiting turnovers, getting a little stronger, etc. So I am still very pleased. I'm very excited about where this team was. And as we've said multiple times now, I was very, very fine with the approach that Trajan Langdon took to the offseason.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern on 94.9 FM in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 98.9 FM in Plainwell, Michigan, 99.5 FM in Lowell, Michigan, 105.1 FM in Kalamazoo, Michigan, 980 AM in Otsego, Michigan, and worldwide on Jethro.fm. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh, executive producer, Deb K, producer, Rex. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.